We have the next panel ready to go. This is how Hollywood impacts us all. And we will start by introducing our esteemed guests. Maria Arias, retired VP of Diversity and Inclusion at Comcast. Jeannie Mao, VP of Diversity at CBS.
Not retired yet.
Not yet retired. And Laura Youngkin, who is a writer and producer who not only produced the event that we're all attending today, but fun fact, she's also a former Disney Imagineer. So, in the interest of time, I just want to quickly say this is a panel. Our intention for this panel is to share the impact of the entertainment business on all of us and our collective thinking, if you will, in our culture. So this 24 minutes is going to fly by really quickly. So in the interest of time, I just want to jump in and I'd love to hear from all of you. I'd love to get your perspective on why you think the progress in the entertainment industry matters to, let's say you're here in Seattle, you work in healthcare, you work in any other industry. Why is it important to all of us what's happening in entertainment?
Well, who watches TV? Who looks at videos on YouTube? Who goes to movies? Anybody ever been to Disney World, right? So much of us, we are the audience for what the entertainment industry pumps out. And so those stories that we tell impact our collective thinking as a society, and they push the needle forward. Think about shows like Will and Grace. Exactly. Right? And like the impact of that and the ability to revive it now and it still means something. Things like that matter. And it's also, the entertainment industry has a global reach. The light bulb moment for me was in 2011. I was assigned to the Shanghai Disneyland project. Shanghai Disneyland opened a couple of years ago. It's the largest Disney theme park in the world. And my big aha moment about the impact of that was that the leader of the project came to us and said, no pressure, everyone, but in a 3.5-hour driving distance of Shanghai Disneyland is the same amount of people that live in the entire United States of America. And I was like, oh, okay, great. So my job was to curate all the live entertainment that was going to be in this park. And I started thinking about the millions and millions of people that might be engaged in seeing that. And then I also realized that in the theme park business, when we build things, we build them to last for 30 or 40 years with maybe a few touches here and there. And so it really matters how we tell those stories because they're going to be there for a while. And millions of people visit them. And that really changed my thinking about just how vast it is and how much it really does matter what kind of stories we tell.
I also think there's a different effect for us on television. We're trying to reach a broad audience. So in early 2000, I think 2002, we launched a show called CSI. And what spiked thereafter was students pursuing degrees in criminology and forensics and medical examiners. So what we realize is if they can see it, they can be it. And unless we're able to normalize what is out there, young children, people in college didn't know these things existed. So we were profoundly moved by the fact that a little television show that can turn DNA around in a matter of seconds, which isn't necessarily true, interest people to pursue degrees in criminology, women in criminology, women medical examinators. So that was really huge. Another thing for us at CBS was the effect that Big Bang Theory, I think you've all heard of it, 20 million viewers a week watch this show. And what does it say? It's maybe they're not interested in science, but they're gonna get it regardless because they're there for the characters and for the funny and for a bunch of misfits being who they are, and they happen to be really smart scientists.
I agree completely. And I think for Comcast, NBC Universal, we recognized that when we were merging this large cable distribution company with a large media company, we had a very unique opportunity to impact what people saw and to create role models across not just this country, but because of the global reach of our TV programs as well as our films. And so, in addition to really trying to get diversity in front and behind the camera through a lot of pipeline programs that we can talk about later, we looked innovatively at also how can you launch more multicultural networks? I mean, I think we found out that Oprah, as renowned as she was and with all the vast resources that she had a tough time launching her network, but she did it. Well, one of the things that we did as part of our commitment to diversity was launch. There's been 9 new independent networks launched, like the Aspire Network by Magic Johnson and the Revolt Network with Sean Combs, several Hispanic networks and other independent networks, and more to come as part of the commitment to make sure that the reach and the power of not just our TV programs or our films, but online and on demand, because so much of what people see now is streamed.
I mean, look at all the tech companies getting into the content business. And Amazon makes their money on selling product, but I think driving viewers to watch their content also drives them to buying products. So it works hand in hand, and they actually have really good product.
And one of the things also is for example, I grew up watching telenovelas in Spanish in black and white. My kids watch them with my babysitter, and now we've taken, Comcast NBC Universal took some programs such as La Reina del Sur, which was a very, very powerful and well-viewed telenovela on Telemundo, and turned it into Queen of the South. And so there's very innovative ways to get that market where you've got bilingual, multi-generational, bicultural families so that they have that reach. Because for Hispanics, watching TV together is a big thing.
You've both mentioned a few particular shows. I'm just wondering if there are any other that you want to name that you feel particularly proud of, or even surprised by the success and the impact of.
I think This Is Us for NBC. I think because it deals with very tough issues, and it's a program that is more real because there aren't a lot of happy endings, and it deals with a lot of tough issues. And it's not just the race and the gender issue, but it's the multi-generational issue and, kind of almost the modern family, the adoption in a multiracial family. So, and it has a very, very diverse and creative team.
One show I'm really proud of is Madam Secretary, and The Good Wife. It's having really strong female leads that are flawed and can make mistakes, but are strong and bold and courageous. And another thing I'm really proud of, and I think we're working towards it, the Gina Davis Foundation does gender in the media studies. And what she found by studying about 150 films was the background scenes in a lot of these films, 19% women. And our world population is over 50% women. And unless we start normalizing what background scenes look like, and it's subtle because you watch a movie and you don't think of background scenes as being anything. But what it does is it unconsciously tells us that the world looks like 19% women, and that's not true. So we went to all our producers and our casting directors to let them know, it's innocuous. Please make an effort to make sure that any background scene, a bar, a restaurant, a walk and talk, an action scene, there's half women. And that's huge, because what it's saying is, if you look at Congress, 19% women. If you look at the tech world, 17, 18, 19% women. The more we start normalizing what we say and show on television, maybe that'll impact the fact that you can pursue this job in this specific field that people think is just predominantly set for men. So I think we're really trying to forge these small changes.
Totally. I'm so glad that you mentioned Gina's work. I'm sure you guys know who Gina Davis is, but if you're not familiar with her institute, it's called the Gina Davis Institute for Gender and Media, and the website is cjane.org. And I really encourage you all to take a look at it. And it's so interesting when you talk to Gina, and she does these amazing presentations at all of our various companies. She hits on this number a lot, like 17%, 18%, 19%. And sometimes it's shocking. It's like they've reviewed thousands of films And they find that even with movies that women are the headliner, women only have 17% of the speaking lines in the film. So it's this weird, consistent number we see like across the board. But institutes like Gina and the work that she's doing, they are really moving the needle and they're providing data points. We're in an industry where we don't do, frankly, I mean, the networks do tons of metrics on viewership. But in the creative side, like where I sit in terms of content, there are not a lot of metrics on like how well we're doing. Unless the leadership is really pushing it, nobody's coming to check, did you guys write in enough people into this scene? Or like, did the casting director really take a hard look at this? That's just not happening. So we need work like that. And the data points really help. But it's super interesting. I encourage all of you to check it out.
And even Shonda realized that all her background scenes were 19%, and she changed it overnight. Because the excuse can be like, we don't have the wardrobe, we don't, whatever it is, but she changed it overnight and said, all my shows, 50% background scene need to be women. And that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
I'd only add, and I'd really like to hit the data point, because I think data is really key. I think Steve spoke a little bit earlier about how you have to treat diversity like you would treat any other part of your business. And I think that any company that wants to be successful with diversity and inclusion, data gives you the objective background on which to further investigate the qualitative as well, and then really build a strategy. Because one of the things we did on the NBC Universal side is we did our own data. We literally did metrics on actors, directors, the cast. I mean, we had it, and we did what benchmarking we could internally, as well as in the industry, what's ever available. And I have to tell you that coming from various regulated industries in my background, it's better to be ahead of the curve and you go out and develop best practices as opposed to having it imposed. Now, the environment that we're in, where, diversity is in the news like almost every day. Yeah. There's always something. And so it's just really important because it's not just the right thing. It's smart business. I mean, look at the demographics, not just of this country, but globally, because we're all dealing in global markets, not just the US.
Maria's totally right, because our company's in the business of making money, and they're looking at numbers. And unless we can quantify it, talking about being nice and equal and inclusive is so abstract. So being able to target, 13% women directors in television, well, let's get to 33%. It's attainable, tangible, and quantifiable, and you can report on it, and it's something to work towards in terms of diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, and I think if you have a company that's really committed and wants to be a leader and want to make a lot of money, one of the things that NBC Universal did was Jen Salke, the president of entertainment, launched a program called Female Forward, where they're working towards 50% women directors for scripted series. And Comcast NBC Universal as a company took us a bit into our diversity strategy, but a couple of years ago, we announced aspirational goals of 50% women across all levels and 33% people of color. And that was big, because once you say that, it's there forever. Wow. And so the company continues to work towards that, because it's hard work and it's going to take time.
I hope the movie business will catch up a little bit. I feel like television is really, people call it the golden age of TV right now, because we have so much content and so many options. And there are really provocative, cool, like just different things happening on TV and on streaming than we've seen in the past. I feel like the movie business is really struggling to keep up. It's also because their model is changing, right? The success of television and the access of these things is changing the types of movies they're creating. I mean, I was in a pitch recently where someone was like, we don't want to see anything unless it's like the Avengers level blockbuster, or it's like an independent film that costs less than $1 million to make. That's all we're interested in. And so that really narrows the types of stories that we're allowed to tell and the types of things that we could write and sell. So I'm more hopeful about TV, and I think TV is really leading the way for the rest of us.
Back in the day, there were 3 networks. Now there's 500 episodes of different types of television on. It's a great place to live, and you can live with these characters for a number of years if you want. But I think it's a really great place, and I think we're definitely having to lead the charge in terms of women telling stories, people of color telling stories, and being inclusive to that.
I'm curious to know more about the data points, and were you instrumental, or did you need to push forward the idea of taking these data points seriously, or either gathering them in the first place? And the reason I'm asking is I'm wondering if I'm in the audience and I'm wondering how I can make my supervisor or my boss or my CEO care about the numbers in my industry. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I run a writers program for writers looking to emerge into television. The same with the directors program. The baseline is they're really good writers. I'm not teaching them to write, but what I'm teaching them is the soft skills. And it's how to get the job, how to stay in a job, how to be in a room with predominantly 8 to 10 white men, how to survive, be the first to arrive, the last to leave, how to show your value, how to identify certain weak spots and go in and be of value in that space. But in terms of how we build that out is we have this program every year, and what we're finding out over 13 years is now we have writers who graduated out of the program who are now show running. So Aaron Thomas is one of the showrunners of a TV show that we have called SWAT. He was once in our program in 2006. So what we realize is, one, we don't operate in silos. So it's just not check off a box, hire that person of color, hire that woman. It's to lift as we rise, one. So now he's hiring for my program, but to make sure that retention is key. So we give you the greatest skills for success so that you don't fall out of the system. And then when you get to a place to manage and hire, you are lifting as you rise.
Mm-hmm.
I agree completely. That is the pipeline. I mean, one of the things that I think this industry faces is the pipeline. And so that the company has a lot of programs for writers, for directors, for producers, in casting. And it's the same thing. They're highly competitive, right? They're relatively small programs, at least all ours are, for like 10 to 15, but you take them through what it's going to take to survive in that area, in this industry. And for example, Mindy Kaling went through one of our programs and has benefited and been on other shows. And now she's come back and she's going to co-executive produce a couple of programs for NBC. So it's not just about creating talent for your network, because in this industry, like in others, folks go from one network to another or one company to another. But in the end, if it's producing the greater good and creating more diversity and inclusion, then that's what the goal.
Mm-hmm.
We have a comedy showcase like they do, and like all the other networks do, and our job is to give you the great access to success. And Randall Park and Kate McKinnon and Tiffany Haddish has come out of it. But more importantly, what we're requiring them to do is when they come in the programs is to understand that there's a greater responsibility, because when they're successful, it's the Mindy Kalings that are coming to give back and staffing her room with people of color and women and telling stories that are diverse.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting, just like most other industries, I mean, the makeup of your organization impacts the product that you put out into the world. It impacts the way it's designed. It impacts the ability for that product or idea to treat other people with dignity. And it's the same inside the entertainment industry, which is vast and has, many layers. There's the show level, there's the creative level, there's the corporate level. If you've watched 30 Rock, it's actually a pretty good representation of how complicated that can be. So it matters on the inside what these organizations are doing in every business unit, because that, at the end of the day, impacts the stories that make it in front of you. And it impacts the stories that make it in front of your children, right? And if you haven't watched like kids TV recently, I would check it out. There are some really cool things happening, but also things that made me go, like, because we have found, and there's research to show that we're conditioning gender roles in children at like the age of 3. So it impacts all of us. But as human beings, we are hardwired for story. We just are. Stories matter. Think about the impact that hearing someone else's story has on you, right? The ability to connect. And so it matters how we do business on the inside because of what we're putting out to everyone else. So
Yeah, if I could just share a 1 minute story, which is I'm also a reformed lawyer, but proud of it because I think the skills I learned have helped me in all my different careers. But when I tell people why I went to law school instead of medical school, because I'm an immigrant from Mexico. So with that fact, you're either a doctor or a lawyer. I said I wanted to be Perry Mason because that's who I saw. And so, when I actually had the chance to move out of ops and build a diversity program, I told that story all the time. I said I had no role models, or like the Hispanic role models were not the kind of person I wanted to see on screen. So it's really important because we hear it all the time, but sometimes, especially for those rising up who don't have all the resources that others may have, you can't be who you can't see, and it makes you give up because it's hard.
Yeah.
I also think another thing based on being able to see it and then being it is as women, the idea and the courage to ask for help and to ask for a general 10-minute session with somebody. We have to be courageous to do that because if we don't, somebody else will. And the notion of asking for help or asking for sponsorship or mentorship is going to bring you to the next level. And, in the entertainment industry, we always say it's not what you know, it's who you know. So half of it is the ask, because you just never know where the yes is going to come.
Yeah. And that's already an incredible piece of advice. We have just 3 minutes to go. So I wondered if you could leave us, if each of you could give us a morsel of advice to take away, some clear bit of knowledge. What would you tell us in addition to what you've already?
right. I would say that, one way that you could also push the needle for the type of content that goes out there is to vote with your dollar and vote with your viewership, right? And if there's things that aren't worthy of your eyeballs or your time or your money, don't watch it, right? Because when those types of when that type of content doesn't perform well, it actually it actually shows the guys at the top that maybe we shouldn't, invest in this type of programming anymore. So what you watch and the choice you make actually does make a difference. That's what I would say.
Great.
For me, piggyback off the asking, it's also when you're in a position of management to make sure that we're hiring interns that maybe look like you, or hiring interns that don't come from the fancy schools, or looking to be a mentor to somebody who may not have had the advantages that you've had. There's a big responsibility in it because we, as women, the idea of scarcity, like if she doesn't get it, it's going to go to it doesn't exist, and we have to make sure it doesn't exist. So it's to lift as we rise one, and make sure when we're in that position of management, to make sure that we're bringing in the next set of wonderful women and people of color into the system so that they can fill the C-suites and make those decisions.
Yeah, they need to be, in decision-making positions of power. That's where they need to be, not just in our industry, in all of our industries. But I love that notion.
I think my advice would be to, as you're working towards, because I think a lot of you here today are trying to get some nuggets and best practices on how to really drive inclusion and equity and more diversity in all aspects, not just race and gender, but the disabled, the LGBT community, Native Americans, which often are forgotten, et cetera, veterans. But it's how to not create an us and them environment. I got asked that question not too long ago, like, how do you build something without doing that? And I guess the morsel I will share is it takes time, and it's about building relationships, and it's about being able to have tough conversations, and it's about knowing when to be the vault and when to advocate and when to leverage. It's strategy. It's really strategy. But at the end of the day, you can't get there if you don't create awareness. And that's not a simple thing. It's going to take time, and it's going to take working with people. And The awareness has to come with someone with authority and power to help drive the change, give people chances, and make decisions.
Well, I want to thank you all, not just for this panel, but for the work that you have done that I don't know about you guys, but with every word that you say, it's dawning on me just what an impact, a direct impact, the work that you have done has had on my life and probably all of our lives. So thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
guys.
Thank you, everyone.